Hello, young people. Welcome to part 2 of our Unit 2.4 videos, Cycles and Cycle Models. In our last video, we introduced the carbon cycle and how carbon exists in the 4 big spheres. In this video, we will talk about how carbon moves between those spheres. The first thing to know is 99+% of the carbon on Earth is found in the geosphere. Most of it is in the form of rock. It's locked up in there. And one of the things that's important to keep in mind when we think about how carbon moves through and between these different spheres is that it moves at different scales, different time scales. So you have some carbon processes, some carbon cycle processes take place on a scale of hours to days. You've got processes that take tens of years or hundreds or thousands of years, or even some processes that take millions of years. And the scale, the time scale for any of those processes affects the carbon cycle as a whole, and it affects the importance of a process within the carbon cycle. So, for example, probably the part of the carbon cycle you are most familiar with, because you learned about it last year in biology, and probably in junior high science as well, is photosynthesis and cellular respiration. As you probably remember, photosynthesis is the way that plants take carbon out of the atmosphere, combine it with some water, shake it up with some sunlight, and make sugar for themselves, and then they fart out a bunch of oxygen because they don't need it. That's photosynthesis. And cellular respiration works exactly the opposite. We breathe in, or an organism takes in oxygen from the atmosphere, mixes it up with some sugar, and basically uses the oxygen to burn up that sugar. We get some energy and some water, and then our cells fart out some carbon dioxide because we don't need it. So this is a process that takes place on a scale of hours, minutes to hours to days. But there are many, many processes. There's a diagram in your book that shows a fairly comprehensive carbon cycle. It's simplified because it's a model, and all models are simplified. But it concerns itself with all kinds of inputs and outputs. And that is basically what a system is concerned with. So, carbon moves from the biosphere to the atmosphere. Carbon moves from the atmosphere to the biosphere. And generally, these inputs and outputs are fairly balanced. But scientists now agree that in the big carbon cycle model, the big one, looking at spheres, we're not looking at an individual organism breathing or photosynthesizing. If we're looking at the big spheres, carbon moves from the geosphere and the hydrosphere into the atmosphere, But carbon also moves from the atmosphere back into the biosphere and back into the hydrosphere. In other words, carbon dioxide gas moves sort of freely between the atmosphere and, for simplicity, let's say the ocean. Atmosphere, ocean. Carbon is just moving back and forth constantly every day. But the problem, and most scientists agree, is that every single year there's more carbon moving into the atmosphere than is moving out of the atmosphere. And the amount is about 5 billion tons of carbon per year. 5 billion tons. Moving into the atmosphere, 5 billion more tons moving into the atmosphere than move out of the atmosphere. And as it turns out, that 5 billion tons of carbon, it amounts to just about exactly the amount of carbon that we human beings burn every year in the form of fossil fuels, whether that's gasoline for our cars or coal for a power plant. We burn carbon for energy, and that carbon goes into the atmosphere. And the reason that scientists are concerned about this, and I hope that you are concerned about this, is because carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, which we might go into more of how that works later. But all we need to know about it right now is a greenhouse gas traps heat in the atmosphere. All right, so there's the carbon cycle. In our next little video here, we're going to focus more on models and modeling and how carbon cycle is modeled and how other cycles are modeled. So, we'll see you in the next video.